Titled parents think they deserve my inheritance because they raised me. They say you can't choose your family, but what do you do when the ones who raised you see you as a bank account instead of their child? When my grandparents passed away, I felt like the last solid ground beneath my feet had crumbled. They had been the ones who made me feel seen, heard, and loved. In a family where affection was as scarce as rainfall in a desert, my grandparents were the oasis I clung to. Losing them left a hole in my chest I didn't know how to fill. But when their lawyer sat me down to discuss their will, I felt a sliver of hope amidst the grief. They had left everything to me. Not just the house I spent my summers in as a child, but also a significant sum of money. I was shocked, not because I didn't know how much they cared about me, but because I knew what this inheritance represented. It wasn't just their way of looking after me even in death, it was a statement. A statement that, deep down, they knew I would need this more than anyone else in our family. It didn't take long for my parents to find out. I hadn't even had time to sit down and process the weight of their generosity when my mom called me, her voice unusually sweet, laced with a syrupy warmth that made my stomach churn. "We heard about the will," she started, skipping past pleasantries. "And, well, your father and I think we should talk about what to do with the money." "What to do with it?" I asked, confused. "I haven't even had time to think about that yet." "Well," she said, her voice dropping into a tone I recognized all too well, one that brokered no argument. "We think it's only fair that you give it to us. After all, we're the ones who raised you. Your grandparents wouldn't want you to keep it all for yourself when we've sacrificed so much for you." At first, I thought she was joking. "Mom, that's not what they said in the will. They left it to me." "Yes, but we all know how they felt about family. They would want us to decide together," she insisted, her words tightening like a noose. Then came my dad's voice in the background, gruff and indignant. "We're the reason you're even in a position to inherit anything. You owe us." My chest tightened. Owe them? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't just asking for a share, they wanted it all. My grandparents' house, their savings, even their small collection of heirlooms that held so much sentimental value to me. Everything. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I told them I needed time to think, to grieve, but they wouldn't let up. Every conversation with them turned into a guilt trip, a lecture about how they had put a roof over my head and fed me for 18 years. It was as if they saw parenting as a loan I was now obligated to repay. When I finally stood my ground and told them I wasn't going to hand over the inheritance, they lost it. My mom burst into tears, wailing about how ungrateful I was, how I was turning my back on my family. My dad, on the other hand, went straight for threats. "If you don't do this, you're on your own," he said. "Don't expect us to help you ever again." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. They hadn't helped me in years. I had been financially independent since I was 19, working multiple jobs through college to avoid asking them for a dime. Meanwhile, they had continued their pattern of reckless spending, always living beyond their means, always expecting someone else, whether it was my grandparents or me, to bail them out. But their reaction wasn't just about the money. It was about control. My parents had always been the kind of people who needed to dominate every aspect of my life, from what I studied in school to who I dated. This inheritance was the first thing I'd ever had that they couldn't touch, and it drove them mad. As the weeks went on, their tactics grew more insidious. They began calling me at all hours, alternating between tearful pleas and angry demands. My mom even showed up unannounced at my apartment one evening, clutching a stack of unpaid bills and begging me to do the right thing. "I don't understand why you're being so selfish," she said, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Your father and I are drowning in debt. We need this money more than you do. What are you even going to do with it?" "Mom, it's not about the money," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about what Grandma and Grandpa wanted. They left it to me because they knew how you've treated me." Her face darkened at that, the mask of desperation slipping to reveal something colder. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Just because they favored you? Let me tell you something. You're nothing without us. Nothing." Her words hit me like a slap, but they also solidified my resolve. For years, I had let my parents' toxic behavior control me, guilt me, make me feel small. But this time, I wasn't going to let them win. As I started going through my grandparents' belongings, preparing to sell their house, I uncovered something that made everything click. Hidden in an old shoebox at the back of their closet were letters. Letters my grandparents had written to each other, to me, and even to my parents. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from my grandfather to my mom, written just a year before he passed away. "We've tried to help you, but it's clear you're unwilling to change," it read. "Your sense of entitlement has driven a wedge between us, and we can't stand by and watch you manipulate and hurt others, especially not my name. That's why we've made the decision to leave everything to my name. We hope this will be a wake-up call for you, but if it's not, we trust my name to do what's best." I sat there for hours, rereading that letter, letting the weight of their words sink in. They had known. They had seen through my parents' facade long before I did, and they had trusted me to handle their legacy, to protect it from the very people who had tried to exploit them. When I confronted my parents with the letter, they were furious. My dad accused me of forging it, while my mom broke down into hysterics, claiming my grandparents had been senile and didn't know what they were doing. But I didn't back down. I told them I was done playing their games, done letting them guilt and manipulate me. "You can hate me all you want," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "But this money isn't yours. It was never yours, and I'm not going to let you take it." That was the last time I spoke to them. Cutting ties with my parents wasn't easy. For weeks, I second-guessed myself, wondering if I'd made the right decision. They had been such a constant presence in my life, even if that presence was toxic. Walking away felt like severing a part of myself. But deep down, I knew it was the only way to truly honor my grandparents' wishes, and to protect myself from further harm. As I worked through the legalities of managing the inheritance, I discovered just how deeply my parents' financial mismanagement had impacted not just them but also the family as a whole. Unpaid debts, shady loans, and even attempts to manipulate my grandparents' finances before their passing. It all painted a picture of greed and irresponsibility that I could no longer ignore. It made me realize that their sense of entitlement wasn't just about the inheritance. It was a pattern, a deeply ingrained belief that the world, and everyone in it, owed them something. Despite their absence in my life, they still found ways to try to interfere. I started receiving calls from extended family members, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly urging me to reconsider my decision. Some of them tried to guilt me, claiming that cutting off my parents was cruel, and that I was tearing the family apart. Others were more blunt, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. It didn't take long to figure out that my parents had been feeding them a carefully crafted narrative, painting themselves as the victims of my heartlessness. At first, their words stung. I had always cared about what others thought of me, and hearing people I once respected side with my parents made me question everything. But then I remembered the letter from my grandfather, the clarity of his words, and the trust he had placed in me. My grandparents had known the truth about my parents, and now, so did I. No amount of manipulation or lies could change that. Still, the weight of the situation was heavy. I felt isolated, cut off not just from my parents but from much of my extended family as well. It was during one particularly lonely evening, as I sorted through my grandparents' belongings, that I found something that gave me strength, a photo album. The album was filled with memories of the times I had spent with my grandparents. Baking cookies in their kitchen, fishing with my grandfather at the lake, curling up on the couch with my grandmother to watch old movies. Each photo was a reminder of the unconditional love and support they had given me, even when my parents had made me feel like I wasn't enough. Flipping through those pages, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This inheritance wasn't just money or property. It was a symbol of their faith in me, a reminder that I was worth more than the way my parents had treated me. Over time, I started to rebuild my life. I used part of the inheritance to pay off my student loans, finally freeing myself from the financial burden that had weighed on me for years. I invested in a small but cozy home, a place that felt like my own sanctuary, and began pursuing a career path I was passionate about but had always been too afraid to chase. For the first time in my life, I felt free, free from guilt, free from manipulation, free to be myself. But just when I thought I had finally left the past behind, my parents found a way to reinsert themselves into my life. One day, I received a letter in the mail, an official-looking envelope with their names on it. Inside was a legal notice. They were suing me, claiming they were entitled to a portion of the inheritance as compensation for raising me. I was stunned. I knew my parents were manipulative, but this was a new low. The idea that they would go so far as to take me to court was both infuriating and heartbreaking. They weren't just trying to take the money, they were trying to break me, to force me back under their control. But I refused to let them win. I hired a lawyer and began preparing for the fight of my life. The legal battle was long and exhausting, dragging on for months. My parents' case was weak, built on emotional appeals and baseless claims, but they were relentless. They painted me as an ungrateful child who had turned my back on the people who had sacrificed everything for me. In court, I stood my ground. I presented the letter from my grandfather, the evidence of their financial mismanagement, and the long history of manipulation and guilt-tripping that had defined our relationship. It wasn't easy, reliving those painful memories in front of strangers, but it was necessary. I wasn't just fighting for the inheritance, I was fighting for my autonomy, my right to live my life on my own terms. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. My parents' case was dismissed, and the inheritance remained mine. But the victory was bittersweet. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I had won, but at what cost? My relationship with my parents was beyond repair, and the ties to much of my extended family had been severed as well. Still, I knew I had made the right choice. My grandparents had left me this inheritance because they believed in me, because they wanted me to have the freedom and security they had worked so hard to build. And now, I was finally honoring their legacy by building a life that reflected their values, honesty, resilience, and love. As the years went by, I continued to grow and heal. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, friends who became like family. I pursued my dreams, built a career I was proud of, and even started giving back to the community, using part of the inheritance to support causes my grandparents had cared about deeply. Looking back, I realized that the inheritance wasn't just a gift, it was a lifeline. It gave me the strength to break free from a toxic cycle, to stand up for myself, and to create a life that honored the love and support my grandparents had always shown me. While my relationship with my parents may never be repaired, I've made peace with that. Because in losing them, I found myself. And that, I've learned, is worth more than anything money could ever buy.